The rehabilitation session had lasted longer than usual. Ray could still feel it in her arms. Every movement had been repeated, corrected, started again with that stubborn patience that defined the clinic's therapists. Stand, sit, straighten, find balance again, over and over. By the end, her legs still responded, but with that heavy slowness that turned every step into a conscious effort. Alyssa gently pushed the wheelchair down the corridor. The silence between them was not uncomfortable. For several weeks now, they had learned to recognize those moments when Ray simply no longer had the energy to communicate, not even with the tablet. Her hands rested on her thighs. She could still feel the fatigue vibrating in her muscles like an echo of the effort.
You did very well today,
Alyssa said softly. Ray gave a slight nod. She had no desire to read encouragement on a screen. She already knew the session had gone well. That wasn't the issue. The issue was the exhaustion that always followed. When they reached the common room, the familiar scent of tea was already drifting into the hallway. Alyssa slowed instinctively. The door was open. Afternoon light filled the room, catching on the white porcelain teapots and the neatly arranged trays of pastries. Tea time had already begun. Ray observed the scene without much reaction. Some patients were seated in the armchairs, their quiet conversations blending with the soft clink of cups. And as always, Madame Leclerc occupied the center of the room with the calm assurance of someone who had decided the space belonged to her. She spotted Ray immediately. Her face lit up.
Ah, there's our favorite convalescent.
She raised her hand enthusiastically.
Alyssa, bring her here at once. You cannot let her slip away without at least having some tea.
Alyssa glanced at Ray. Ray hesitated. She would have gladly continued straight to her room. The chair suddenly felt heavy beneath her, as if the fatigue had settled into every muscle in her body. But Madame Leclerc was already beckoning them, with almost comical determination. Ray let out a silent sigh and made a small gesture with her hand. Alyssa understood. The chair shifted direction. Madame Leclerc immediately pushed a tray toward them.
Sit, and take a pastry before these ladies empty the entire tray.
She cast a conspiratorial glance at a woman seated near the window.
I won't name names, of course.
The woman looked up from her book.
I can hear you perfectly well, Leclerc.
All the better,
she replied with satisfaction. Alyssa positioned Ray's chair near the table. The warmth of the tea filled the room. Madame Leclerc poured a cup with almost ceremonial care and placed it into Ray's hands.
There. Much better for recovery than all those dreadful protein drinks.
Ray slowly closed her fingers around the warm porcelain. The heat spread through her palms. She remained silent. The fatigue still weighed on her shoulders, and she simply let Madame Leclerc's voice fill the space, as always.
You've arrived just in time for today's column.
Madame Leclerc continued. She leaned slightly toward Ray, as if the entire room should not hear what came next.
You see, our dear Mr. Lambert does not meditate in the garden at all.
Ray barely lifted her gaze.
Yes.
She knew him, always seated beneath the cypress trees, eyes closed, perfectly composed. Madame Leclerc continued, clearly delighted.
He is simply hiding from his third wife.
She raised a finger to emphasize the gravity of the situation.
She arrived this morning with 2 lawyers and an entire suitcase full of documents.
She shook her head with perfectly theatrical sympathy.
I'll let you imagine the atmosphere in their suite.
Despite herself, a breath escaped Ray. Almost a laugh, Madame Leclerc noticed immediately.
You see?
She exclaimed with satisfaction.
I knew my stories had therapeutic value.
Alyssa smiled softly. Madame Leclerc took a sip of her tea.
But that is nothing compared to last week's affair.
She lowered her voice, as if about to reveal something even more delicious.
You see that blonde woman over there?
Ray followed her gaze vaguely. An elegant patient sat near the window, distant, composed.
Officially, she's here for stress.
Madame Leclerc continued.
But the truth is a little more dramatic.
She leaned in slightly.
A desperate attempt after her own daughter decided to cut all contact with her.
Madame Leclerc gave a small shrug, almost sympathetic.
Family matters are always the most tragic.
Ray did not move. The cup in her hands stilled completely. The warmth of the porcelain was almost burning her fingers now, yet she did not loosen her grip. Something had tightened deep in her chest, and this time it had nothing to do with physical fatigue. The heat became too much. The porcelain burned against her skin. Ray felt it clearly, but she did not let go of the cup. Her gaze remained fixed somewhere ahead, unmoving, as though Madame Leclerc's words were still suspended in the air around her. Her own daughter, cutting all contact, the words repeated in her mind with a strange slowness, as if someone had written them inside her skull. The fatigue made everything blurrier, rawer. She no longer truly saw the room. She saw only fragments, the light from the window, the white tablecloth, and Madame Leclerc's voice with that sentence repeating again and again, her daughter. Ray's fingers tightened around the cup. The pain finally surged, sharp and burning. Still, she did not move. Alyssa was the first to understand something was wrong. She had learned to observe Ray without waiting for words. She saw the tension in her hand, the fixed gaze, the uneven rhythm of her breathing.
My lady?
Her voice was low. Madame Leclerc, still mid-story, stopped immediately. She followed Alyssa's gaze and saw the cup. The porcelain trembled slightly between Ray's fingers.
Oh.
The word slipped out, far more serious than her usual chatter. Alyssa leaned in at once.
My lady, the cup.
Ray did not respond. Her fingers did not move. She no longer seemed to feel the heat. So Alyssa gently placed her hand over Ray's. A calm, careful gesture.
Let me take it.
She slowly loosened Ray's grip and took the cup before it could slip. The porcelain made a soft sound against the saucer as she set it down. Silence settled. This time, Madame Leclerc did not speak. She watched Ray with a new kind of attention, far sharper than before. Her gaze moved briefly between Ray and Alyssa. Then she understood. The light conversation had touched something real. And for once, Madame Leclerc had the tact not to ask questions. She simply pushed the pastry tray slightly away, as if the table had suddenly ceased to be a place of entertainment. Alyssa remained beside Ray, calm and attentive.
We're going back to your room,
She said softly. It was not a question, but Ray had not moved yet, because in her mind, one thought had taken over everything.
Conte.
And for the first time since she woke up, the word no longer felt like a memory. It was an absence. Alyssa did not insist further. She simply placed a light hand on the back of the chair and turned it toward the corridor. Madame Leclerc did not try to stop them. For once, she remained silent. Conversation resumed behind them, but in much lower voices, as if everyone had instinctively understood that something had just passed through the room. The corridor was quiet. Ray did not write anything on the tablet. She did not ask for anything. She simply allowed herself to be taken back to her room. When Alyssa gently closed the door, the space returned to that particular silence of convalescence. Ray remained in the chair for a while, her hands resting on her knees. The fatigue from rehabilitation still weighed on her muscles, but it was no longer only that. Something else had settled in. Something much older. Alyssa prepared the room with her familiar precise movements, curtains drawn, the blanket adjusted, and the tablet placed on the bedside table.
Try to rest a little,
She said softly. Ray gave a slight nod. She allowed herself to be helped onto the bed. The mattress welcomed her tired body with an almost deceptive softness. Alyssa lingered for a few seconds. Then she left. When the door closed, the silence returned. Ray stared at the ceiling. For a moment, she thought the thoughts would come back. The memories, the images, and the anger. But nothing came. Only an overwhelming fatigue, and that word still drifting somewhere in her mind.
Cante.
She closed her eyes and sleep eventually took her. Night fell without her noticing. The room was in darkness now. Only the faint light of the city filtered through the curtains. And Ray opened her eyes. She didn't know why. The silence was complete. And for the first time in days, Arjun was not there. Usually, even in her most unsettled moments, he remained somewhere in her thoughts, a presence, sometimes a voice or a memory. But that night, there was nothing. Only her, and the vast space left behind by absence. Ray remained still, and the word returned.
Cante.
And this time, there was no anger, no defense, only a slow, quiet pain. The tears came without her realizing, one, then another. They simply slid along her temples, disappearing into her hair. Ray made no sound. She did not try to wipe them away. For once, no one was there to watch her or to ask her to be strong. So she cried without words and witness. Like a mother who suddenly remembers that she has lost her daughter, Alyssa knocked softly on the door, as she did every morning, before opening it with care. The pale light of day had already settled into the room. Ray was awake. She was no longer sleeping. Sitting upright in bed, her back perfectly straight against the pillow, she seemed to have been waiting for some time already, her hands resting calmly on the blanket, as though the night had been nothing more than a quiet pause in a day that had already begun. Alyssa paused briefly at the threshold. It took her only a few seconds to notice what betrayed the night, nothing dramatic. But Ray's eyes were slightly reddened, and her gaze carried that particular kind of fatigue that only follows hours of restless sleep. Alyssa understood immediately and did not ask any questions.
Good morning, my lady.
Her voice remained soft, almost cautious, as though she instinctively sought to preserve the fragile calm of the room. She moved to open the curtains, letting the morning light slowly fill the space.
Today is a day of rest.
She added simply.
The doctors have decided to suspend the sessions so you can recover.
Ray lifted her gaze slightly toward her. Alyssa continued, unhurried.
So no rehabilitation, no speech therapy.
A quiet silence settled between them, one of those silences that carried no discomfort and that almost felt necessary after the strain of the previous days. Alyssa prepared the morning tray with her usual precise gestures, then remained still for a moment, considering how the day might unfold.
If you feel up to it, we could go out for a while this afternoon,
she finally suggested. Ray listened attentively. Alyssa thought aloud.
The garden is pleasant, though it's still a little cool at this hour, and the library is open, of course.
Ray showed no particular enthusiasm. She simply watched Alyssa with that calm expression that always made her reactions difficult to read. Then Alyssa seemed to remember something.
The screening room is open this afternoon.
This time, Ray lifted her eyes slightly. She reached for the tablet beside her and wrote a few words. Alyssa read,
What film?
She quickly checked the program on her phone.
An old romantic classic.
She replied after a moment.
The story of a widowed man who meets a younger woman and falls in love with her despite himself.
She scanned the description.
Apparently, their relationship isn't very well received by those around them.
Ray looked at the screen for a few seconds. Then she wrote simply,
Let's go.
The clinic's screening room resembled a small, private lounge more than an actual cinema. The wide, comfortable armchairs were arranged in a semicircle facing the screen, and the dim lighting gave the room a calm, almost intimate atmosphere. A few patients were already seated, and, of course, Madame Leclerc occupied one of the most central seats, a blanket elegantly draped over her knees as though she had settled in for the entire duration of the film. When she spotted Ray, her face lit up at once.
Ah, there you are at last.
Her voice remained low, respectful of the setting, but her enthusiasm was unchanged.
Come, sit here. Let's see whether this film truly deserves its reputation.
Alyssa gently positioned Ray's chair beside her. Madame Leclerc studied the screen with interest.
A romantic classic.
She murmured with an amused smile.
That always promises a few interesting scandals.
The lights dimmed and the film began. It opened on the quiet life of a man who had lost his wife several years earlier. He lived in a large house with unchanging routines, a quiet solitude. Then the young woman appeared, more vivid and spontaneous. Their meeting seemed insignificant at first, almost ordinary, but very quickly the story revealed its true nature. They grew closer, despite themselves, and around them, the glances turned disapproving. Alyssa followed the story attentively, but more than once, she couldn't help casting a discreet glance toward Ray. Ray watched the screen with calm focus, as though she were simply observing a story that bore no connection to her own life. At one precise moment, the man in the film said softly,
"Some encounters come too late in a life."
Ray allowed the faintest smile to form, so slight it might have gone unnoticed. But Alyssa saw it, and Madame Leclerc as well. She turned her head very slowly toward Ray, then back to the screen, before returning her gaze to Ray with a look that carried a quiet, mischievous understanding. The film continued for a few more minutes. Then the lights gradually came back on. The patients began to leave the room in a low murmur. Ray, however, did not seem disturbed. She simply looked at the now blank screen. Then she picked up the tablet. She wrote a few words. Alyssa read,
A beautiful story.
She lifted her eyes toward Ray, and for the first time since the night before, something in the atmosphere felt lighter, not joyful, but peaceful. Alyssa gently pushed the chair toward the exit, and the two of them left the room as the afternoon light slowly spread through the quiet corridor of the clinic. The office was quiet, almost too carefully arranged, as if everything had been placed at a precise enough distance never to collide. Nothing protruded, nothing imposed itself. A soft light filtered through the blinds, dim enough not to offend, but still sufficient to keep the room from feeling like a refuge. Ray remained still for a moment after she had been settled in. She observed, without truly looking, the chair across from her, slightly reclined, the low table, empty. The discreet scent of wood and clean fabric lingered in the room. Nothing here tried to confine her, and yet she felt trapped. The psychiatrist did not speak immediately. He let a few seconds pass, perhaps more, as though he were searching for the exact point at which to enter without forcing anything.
Do you think about your daughter often?
The question reached her without abruptness. She did not lift her eyes right away. Her fingers rested on the tablet, still, but she did not rush to answer. There was a suspended interval, almost imperceptible, in which she seemed to be weighing something heavier than the words themselves. Then she wrote,
Yes.
The word remained simple, direct, but it was not empty.
What do you think about when you do?
This time she hesitated longer. She could have stayed with that first word, allowed it to be enough, even hidden inside it. But something, perhaps the psychiatrist's tone or the silence that did not hurry her, pushed her a little further. Her fingers began to move, more slowly.
She didn't like sleeping alone.
She stopped, reread the sentence, as if those few words had opened a door she had not intended to touch.
She used to say the silence was too loud.
A breath escaped her, discreet, but different from the ones before. Less controlled.
So I stayed with her.
She paused, then added,
Until she fell asleep.
The memory settled in without her really trying to hold it back. She could see again the little hand clinging to hers, the way the fingers would tighten slightly before letting go, the warmth of that small body gradually relaxing against her. That precise moment when the child's vigilance finally gave way, when fear eased enough to leave room for sleep. The psychiatrist did not interrupt her. He wrote nothing down. He simply let her remain there, inside the space she had just opened.
How long did you stay?
Ray looked at the screen for a few seconds. The answer came almost without resistance.
Until she let go of my hand.
And for the first time since she had entered the room, something in her truly loosened. It was not visible from the outside, at least not in any obvious way, but her shoulders lost that almost constant tension, as though this memory, despite everything, was not entirely painful.
You love her.
The sentence did not take the shape of a question. It simply settled there, like something self-evident. Ray did not answer right away, but she did not look away either. She remained facing the screen, her fingers suspended, unable to deny what had just been named.
You still love her.
This time, she wrote without hesitation.
Yes.
The word appeared, and almost immediately, something closed again. Her breath caught slightly, imperceptible to anyone who was not paying attention. Her fingers remained above the tablet, motionless, as if she had only just realized what she had admitted. The image of the little hand vanished brutally, replaced by something else. Another scene, another gesture, a fracture impossible to ignore. Her shoulders stiffened again.
I should never have.
The psychiatrist tilted his head slightly.
Loved your daughter?
Ray gave the faintest shake of her head. The movement was minimal, almost restrained. Her fingers trembled slightly before moving again.
Done that to her.
She did not specify. She did not need to. The silence that followed was no longer the same. It was no longer neutral, nor even peaceful. It was dense, charged with everything she was not saying, everything she could not formulate without colliding with herself. The psychiatrist let that silence exist. Then, with the same gentleness as before,
Did she tell you she never wanted to see you again?
the question seemed to reach her differently. Ray remained still, but her gaze faltered slightly. A more recent memory imposed itself. Agee's voice, the carefully chosen words, the absence of certain answers. At last, her fingers moved.
No.
Did anyone tell you that?
This time she remained without answering, even longer, as if she were trying to verify something she had never truly examined until now. Then,
No.
the psychiatrist nodded slightly, without triumph, without insistence.
Then that idea,
He paused, allowing the words to find their place.
it did not come from her.
Ray stared at the screen. Her breathing grew shorter, shallower. She sensed vaguely where this was leading, and yet she could not turn away.
It came from you.
There was no accusation in his voice, only exposure. Ray lowered her eyes slightly, not to flee, more as if holding that precise point had become too heavy. Her fingers descended slowly.
I don't have the right.
The words appeared one by one, steady this time. They did not resemble a passing thought. It was a rule. Something she had decided somewhere between fear, shame, and lucidity. The psychiatrist did not contradict her immediately. He looked at her attentively, as if weighing the true burden of what she had just written.
You think you no longer have the right to be her mother?
Ray did not answer, but she did not correct him either. And in that silence, there was no longer any doubt. The room had returned to its usual silence, the kind that settled once the corridor lights were dimmed and the staff's footsteps grew farther apart. Nothing disturbed the air except the discreet sound of machines and, sometimes, a distant movement one sensed more than saw. It was a clean silence, almost disciplined, and yet, that evening, it did not soothe her. Ray had not lain down. She remained sitting on the bed, her back lightly supported by the headboard, her legs stretched out before her without any real comfort. The blanket rested only loosely over her knees, as though she had not found the will to slip beneath it. The room was neither cold nor uncomfortable, but she was not trying to settle into it. She remained there, suspended in an in-between. Her fingers rested on her thighs, motionless, but her mind kept returning backward. The psychiatrist's words did not echo like a voice. They returned differently, more diffuse, like an idea she could no longer move around. She could not ignore them any more than she could reject them. They had settled inside her with unsettling precision, as if they had found a space already waiting for them. She had never formulated things that way before. Not so clearly, not so directly. She inhaled slowly, but the air felt heavier than usual, as though each breath demanded an extra effort. At first, she saw again the memory she had evoked earlier, almost despite herself. The little hand, the fragile warmth of that body still too young to understand its own fears. The way Conte clung to her, as though her presence alone were enough to keep away whatever frightened her. She remembered the weight of that hand in her own, that precise moment when the fingers finally loosened, when the tension disappeared enough to give way to sleep. That memory remained intact. Too intact. It had not been altered by what followed. It still existed, whole, almost cruel in its simplicity, and that was precisely what made it unbearable. Her gaze drifted into the dimness of the room. Then, without her truly controlling it, another image imposed itself, more recent, more violent. She did not see every detail again, not like a clear scene. It was more fragmented, more unstable, a sense of urgency, a sudden, uncontrollable rise, and after that, emptiness, shock, the point of no return. Her body stiffened slightly. She turned her eyes away, as if that alone might be enough to push back what was returning. But it did not disappear. It never truly disappeared. What came next followed on its own. The cell, the reduced space, time stretching without ever truly passing. The gaze of others, sometimes absent, sometimes too present. And above all, the absence of everything that had mattered before, and then that conversation, the last one. She had not forgotten the way he had stood before her, the restraint in his voice, the precision of his words. He had said nothing too much, nothing false either.
Kante is traumatized. She isn't ready to see you.
He had not said she refused, nor that she no longer wanted her, and yet... Ray slowly closed her eyes. That was what she had understood, or perhaps what she had chosen to understand. Her fingers tightened slightly against the blanket. She felt something constrict in her chest, less sharp than pain, but present enough not to be ignored. Not a surprise, but more of a recognition. She had never expected an answer. She didn't even try to know, because deep down, she had already given herself one. A breath escaped her, longer this time. Her gaze lowered again to her hands. They were calm, too calm. The same hands that had held her daughters, these same hands that once did her harm. She remained like that for a while, without moving, as if simply looking at them were enough to contain everything she could not bring herself to formulate. Then, slowly, a thought began to take shape, more fragile than the others, less sharp.
Is there still something left?
She did not speak it aloud. She did not turn it into written words. She simply let it exist, without knowing what to do with it. It was not hope yet, not really. It was too uncertain to bear that name, but it was no longer certainty either. And that alone was enough to unsettle her, because if she was no longer sure, then everything she had built over the past 2 years could begin to give way. Her shoulders tensed slightly. She then inhaled more slowly. Did she have the right to hope? The question struck her almost at once. No. The answer came with familiar speed, almost reassuring in its harshness. She had no right. She never had, and yet. Her gaze blurred slightly. The image of Conte as a child returned without warning, the way she had clung to her, that total, blind trust that had once seemed impossible to shake. Ray felt her throat tighten. She looked away, but too late. The emotion was already there, not violent or overwhelming, but present enough to crack what she had been holding together for far too long. She remained motionless, caught between two opposite movements. On one side, that familiar, rigid voice reminding her what she had done, what she had become, what she no longer had the right to be. On the other, something quieter, more dangerous, perhaps, an almost imperceptible desire to remain a little longer.
To be able to remain near her.
The thought passed through her like a fault. Her breath caught slightly, almost with shame. She closed her eyes as though that might be enough to erase the idea, but it did not disappear. It remained there, fragile, uncomfortable, but alive. Ray slowly opened her eyes again. The silence of the room had not changed, but something in her had. A change that was almost nothing. And yet, it was enough that she could no longer go back in exactly the same way. She remained sitting there for a long time, without trying to lie down, letting those thoughts move through her, without fixing them in place, without rejecting them either. As though, for the first time in a long while, she was allowing herself not to have an answer to those questions. The rehabilitation room had none of the muted comfort of the clinic's other spaces. Everything here seemed designed for efficiency before anything else. The walls were barer, the light more direct, almost harsh, and the air carried that unmistakable smell of disinfectant that never truly disappeared. The equipment stood aligned with precision, with no decor to soften its presence. Nothing invited lingering or tried to reassure. And yet Ray was there, seated on the edge of the medical bed, her hands placed on either side of her as though searching for some point of anchorage in an environment that offered no escape. She was tired, not the visible, dramatic kind of exhaustion that would have justified stopping the session. This was a duller fatigue, settled deep within her body and tangled with what had awakened the day before. She had barely slept, or rather, she had drifted without ever truly surrendering, left alone with thoughts she had not managed to quiet. And yet, something in her remained tense. Not in the sense of rigidity, in the sense of attention. The physiotherapist approached, briefly consulting her file before lifting his eyes to her.
We're going to try something simple today.
His voice was professional, without harshness, but without detours either.
Standing up, staying upright, and taking a few steps.
Nothing extraordinary when said like that. But Ray immediately felt her body react to the anticipation alone. Her fingers closed slightly over the edge of the bed. Alyssa stood a little farther back, as always, present without imposing herself, attentive to every movement, ready to intervene before anyone even asked. Her presence had become familiar, almost constant, but even today, Ray did not look at her right away. She focused on the movement, on what was being asked of her and what she had to do. The physiotherapist moved closer, ready to help her rise. Ray inhaled slowly, then she began. The motion was more difficult than she had anticipated. Her body responded with an inertia that frustrated her immediately. Her legs, still uncertain, seemed to hesitate before bearing her weight, as though they no longer fully recognized their own function. And yet she rose. Slowly, her hands left the bed, and for one suspended instant, she found herself standing. The world did not tilt immediately, but neither did it steady itself. A faint dizziness settled in, diffuse, accompanied by that unpleasant sensation of no longer fully controlling what was supporting her. Her muscles trembled, discreetly at first, then more visibly. The physiotherapist took a step toward her, a professional reflex, his hand lifted to steady her, and that was the moment Ray reacted. She raised her own, a simple gesture, but clear, a refusal. She did not look away or try to explain, but the message was clear.
Not this time.
A slight silence followed, barely perceptible, but enough for the physiotherapist to stop. He studied her face for a moment, as if making sure she understood what she was doing, then stepped back. Alyssa, for her part, had not moved, but all her attention had tightened. Ray remained standing. Her legs were still trembling, more openly now. Each second seemed to stretch the limit of what she could endure. She could feel how fragile her balance was, how precarious, as though the slightest lapse might send her tipping over. But she did not yield. She adjusted her posture slightly, almost unconsciously, as though her body was still searching, despite everything, for some way to hold. Then she took a step. The movement was awkward, hesitant, far from fluid. Her foot touched the ground with excessive caution, as though she were still testing whether the gesture itself was real. But it was real. A first step. She inhaled again, shorter this time. Then a second. Her body faltered, more distinctly. A sudden loss of balance, nearly enough to tip her sideways. Her shoulders tightened at once, her hands lifting slightly in an instinctive attempt to catch herself. Alyssa moved, instinctively. But Ray held. Not with ease, but enough not to fall. Her legs were trembling violently now. The strain was everywhere, in her muscles, her breathing, and in the way she was trying to maintain a center of gravity that still kept slipping away from her. She would not hold much longer, she knew it. And yet she remained there for another second, perhaps two. Then her body gave way, not like a fall, but like a controlled surrender. Her knees bent and she let herself sink back onto the bed, the movement quicker than she would have wanted, but without violence. Alyssa had moved closer at the last moment, ready to support her. But in the end, she did not need to intervene. She simply remained there, within reach, attentive, like a silent presence that had not crossed the line. Silence settled over the room again. Different this time, denser. The physiotherapist watched Ray for a few seconds, visibly impressed despite himself, but he made no immediate comment. He let her catch her breath, let her recover what she had just mobilized. Ray, for her part, did not try to meet either of their eyes. She stared at her hands, again, always. They were trembling slightly, not only from the effort. She reached for the tablet. Her fingers were still unsteady, but she took her time. Then she wrote,
Again.
The word appeared, simple, without satisfaction. There was no victory in her gaze, no relief either, as if what she had just done was not an accomplishment, but an obligation. Morning had settled in without a sound. Ray was already awake. She no longer knew for how long. Her sleep had not been steady these past few days. It came, withdrew, and frayed without warning, and she remained there, suspended between two states, never truly surrendering to either. That morning, she lay in bed, her gaze turned toward the window. The glass cut the world into silence. Beyond it, the morning light held that almost deceptive softness, the kind that made everything seem simple, as though nothing had changed, as though life still moved according to a rhythm she might somehow belong to. She watched the figures below, passers-by, a few irregular movements, trajectories that had nothing to do with her. The people she was looking at did not know, and they could not know. Her fingers rested on the sheet, calm, inert, at least in appearance. But inside her, something was at work, a thought refusing to stay where it belonged.
Go out.
An obvious thing that returned again and again until it became impossible to ignore.
Go out.
Not into the corridors, not into this controlled, measured, anticipated space. She wanted something else. A sigh left her, touched with frustration. Something caught between lack, impatience, and a form of exhaustion, as though remaining here any longer was becoming too much. That was when a movement drew her attention. Alyssa had entered the room, discreet, straight-backed and attentive without being intrusive. Ray finally turned her eyes away from the window. She reached for the tablet with a gesture that did not hesitate. Her fingers moved lightly over the surface for a moment, just long enough for the thought to sharpen. She wrote,
I want to go out.
Then she lifted her eyes slightly toward Alyssa. Alyssa read it, and her expression did not change immediately, but something in her posture adjusted. She became more attentive, more cautious.
Of course, my lady.
Her voice remained soft, composed, faithful to what it had been from the beginning.
Would you like us to go to the gardens?
The answer was logical, predictable, safe. Ray lowered her gaze briefly to the tablet. She already knew the gardens by heart, their laid-out paths, those carefully designed spaces meant to soothe. That freedom, contained and arranged, had begun to weary her. It was not what she wanted. Her fingers returned to the tablet. This time, the movement was quicker, more direct.
No.
Then,
I want to go into the city.
the silence that followed lasted no more than a second, but it was dense. Alyssa did not answer right away, not out of refusal, but because the request was not a usual one.
The city.
She repeated the word softly, as though weighing it. Her gaze shifted back to Ray.
That will require a few preparations, my lady.
Ray held her gaze. Alyssa inclined her head slightly.
I will inquire immediately.
She straightened with that same quiet precision and left Ray alone. The room recovered its calm. Alyssa was not gone for long. Ray had not moved her gaze from the window. But even before Alyssa spoke, she knew something had been decided.
My lady.
The voice was the same, soft, composed, and perfectly in place.
Permission has been granted. We can arrange a trip into the city.
The words were simple, but what they carried was not. Ray did not move at once, and yet, with that one confirmation, something that had until now been only impulse became real. Alyssa continued without haste.
Security will remain at a distance, so as not to obstruct your movements.
Her eyes briefly dropped to the chair.
It is, however, recommended that you remain seated for the duration of the outing.
It was not an order, but neither was it truly an option.
The route will be limited, in order to avoid excessive fatigue.
Each condition was added calmly, without pressure, without any visible rigidity. And yet, the framework was there, clear and invisible, but solid. Ray felt her fingers tighten slightly on the armrest. She could go out, yes, but not freely. She knew that perfectly well. And still, she did not retreat. She slowly turned away from the window just enough to meet Alyssa's eyes. There was neither refusal nor frustration in her expression, but something more subtle, a lucid acceptance. She knew what she was being granted and what was being taken from her at the same time. Her fingers moved over the tablet.
It's enough.
Alyssa inclined her head.
Very well, my lady.
And in that simple exchange, something settled into place. Ray did not control everything, but she had chosen. And for now, that was enough. The drive passed without incident. The vehicle moved with an almost unreal smoothness, cutting through the outside world without ever truly joining it. Through the tinted glass, the city appeared only in fragments, sliding past without insisting. Ray said nothing. She watched. When the car finally slowed, something shifted, not abruptly, but enough for her attention to tighten. The door opened. Air entered. It was different, less clean and controlled, but alive. The sounds did not form a coherent whole. On the contrary, they layered over one another. Voices, footsteps, and an engine too close. A burst of laughter that came without warning. A metallic sound she did not identify at once. Nothing was filtered, even less adjusted. And that was precisely what struck her. She was settled with care. The chair glided over the ground with measured softness, almost in contrast to the surrounding agitation. Alyssa remained slightly behind her, guiding the chair.
We can move on, my lady.
Ray did not answer, because her gaze had already gone elsewhere. She was not discovering. It was not curiosity. Not exactly. It was something else. A diffuse recognition not of places or faces, but of sensations. The uneven rhythm of footsteps on the pavement, light reflecting in a shop window, the discreet disorder of a street that made no attempt to be perfect. She knew this was not her city, and yet, something in that very imperfection answered something in her. Her gaze lingered on a narrower side street, set slightly back from the main flow. The light fell differently there, softer and more slanted. Her fingers tightened slightly because she knew that sensation. The alley itself was nothing remarkable, too narrow to draw attention and way too ordinary to be noticed. And yet Ray's gaze did not leave it. The light fell at an angle, cut by the uneven height of the buildings. It did not fill the space. It only passed through it, leaving denser patches of shadow, almost motionless. A sound slipped into it, light, sharp, the discreet strike of a soul against a stone step. Her fingers stilled on the armrest. Her gaze sharpened. She looked at the stone, the steps, even the shadow. Ray's breath suspended itself slightly. She had been there before, not in this place, but elsewhere. The shift did not come brutally. The alley slowly dissolved and made room for something else. The stone was older there, more uneven, worn by time and by repeated passage. Ray was younger, climbing the steps two at a time. Her breathing was quick, but she did not slow down.
You're going to end up falling.
She lifted her eyes without surprise.
I'm used to it.
The voice came from behind her, calm, steady, faintly amused.
That doesn't make it a good reason.
Ray turned halfway, already in motion. A brief smile, almost insolent, passed over her face.
Then watch closely.
And she resumed climbing. The temple where she had grown up appeared as she rose. It was a place of rules, silence, restraint. But she was not always meant for her place there. Her steps finally slowed when she reached the upper landing. She placed a hand against the wall, catching her breath without really stopping. Then, with a quick gesture that seemed almost habitual, she glanced behind her. No one. A more open smile pulled at her lips. Because she was not supposed to go out that day, not alone, and certainly not like that. And yet, she slipped through the side entrance, moving beyond the supervised spaces with an ease that did not belong to a first attempt. The air was different below, freer, less burdened. This time she went down more slowly, almost savoring each step. There was always something to see outside, something they did not give her inside, and she wanted to see it again. The piano was out of tune in the lower register. She had noticed it the first time, and ever since, it was all she could hear.
You listen too much.
Ray looked up. She was sitting very straight, but tense, her hands resting on her knees as though they were not yet allowed to exist.
It sounds wrong.
The woman across from her lifted one eyebrow slightly, not annoyed, not mocking.
And?
The word remained there, simple and unexpected. Ray frowned faintly.
It bothers me.
A brief silence followed. Then a finger touched a key. The note rang out. Imperfect.
So does life.
Ray did not answer. Her shoulders stiffened even more.
Are you waiting for everything to be right before you begin to sing?
The remark did not strike like a blow. It settled.
I don't want to fail.
The answer came out faster than she would have liked. More naked, too. The woman's gaze softened. Only barely.
You will fail.
Ray lowered her eyes. Her fingers tightened slightly against the fabric of her trousers.
And then you'll begin again.
Silence. Longer this time, denser. Then,
Go on, sing.
Ray inhaled a little too quickly. The first sound she gave wavered, and she nearly stopped at once.
Continue.
The voice did not push her, but it did not leave her an escape either. Ray closed her eyes. 1 second, no more. Then she began again. This time her voice trembled too, but she did not stop. And then something happened, fragile, unstable, but real. The note held, a moment longer, then fell.
There.
Ray opened her eyes again.
That wasn't perfect,
A slight breath, almost a smile.
but it was alive.
Ray remained still. She did not yet understand completely, but something in her had just opened. The sound of the piano did not vanish entirely. It thinned out as though blending into something else. Voices, younger ones, more numerous.
Ray, you're late again.
She lifted her head, out of breath, as always. Her bag slipped on her shoulder as she barely slowed.
I said I was coming.
Yeah, but when you say I'm coming, it means 20 minutes from now.
A laugh burst out, then another. Ray rolled her eyes, but something in her expression had already softened.
You're unbearable.
And you're slow.
I'm not talking to you anymore.
You say that every day.
She finally stopped in front of them. They were a small group, disorderly and loud. They could not keep still. Some spoke over one another. Others were already tapping rhythms on their thighs or against the wall behind them. Someone was humming without really singing. Someone else was correcting him.
No, not like that.
Yes, it is. Listen.
No, you're off.
Ray dropped her bag to the ground, without waiting, without asking. She stepped into the noise as though it belonged to her.
You're all off.
Oh, so now she's here to judge?
Someone has to.
Go on then, show us.
After a brief silence, Ray inhaled, and her voice came out. Still imperfect, still fragile in places, but she did not stop. The looks changed, subtly, not admiring, not yet, but attentive.
That's better.
Yeah.
You've been working.
Ray looked away slightly, as though she refused to linger on it.
I just practiced.
Liar.
A faint smile passed. That was when he spoke.
Again.
The voice was not louder than the others, but it cut through them without effort. Ray turned her head and saw him. He was standing slightly apart, not isolated, but not at the center either. Akihito.
Again. From the beginning.
He gave her direction, and Ray held his gaze for a moment, then gave the slightest nod, and began again. They had never really decided to go there. It had simply become natural, a small shop on the corner, too narrow for the number of them, and too noisy to be comfortable. And yet, they always came back.
What are we getting?
Nothing.
Oh, come on.
I don't have money.
As usual?
You don't either.
I do.
Ray set a few coins down on the table.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Madame Rich.
Shut up.
But she was smiling. They crowded around the table, elbows crossing, bags dropping to the floor without anyone caring. Someone grabbed a drink before it had even been properly set down. Another protested without any real conviction.
Hey, that was mine.
You should have taken it first.
You're impossible.
Are you coming tomorrow?
Ray lifted one shoulder slightly.
Maybe.
Don't lie.
I'm not lying.
You always come.
A brief silence. Then,
Yeah.
Akihito was there, not in the center, never, but present. He watched more than he spoke. And when he did speak,
You're still forcing the ending.
Ray turned toward him.
I did it the way you said.
Not exactly,
A pause.
but it was better.
That was all, and yet, it was enough. Ray lowered her eyes slightly. Not to hide, but to keep that for herself. The memory might have gone on and stretched even further, but something slipped into it. A sound, discreet at first, almost drowned by everything else. Then clearer, a melody. Ray did not recognize it immediately, not consciously, but her body, it froze. The noise of the street came back, at once, brutally. The chair, the pavement, the light. Everything had returned to its place, but the music remained. Not inside the memory, here, real. It was coming from a little farther away. A display window, or a half-open door. Ray did not move. Then, slowly, she turned her head. The opening notes repeated. And this time, there was no doubt. It was them. Not exactly, but enough. She recognized the structure of the melody, its progression, even its intentions. Her group's song was there, but something was missing, or had been changed. Her breathing caught the voice. It was not the same. It was not hers. The interpretation differed from the one she knew, because someone else was singing, over something that had belonged to them. Her fingers tightened on the armrest. The world around her continued, indifferent, and something inside her gave way. It was not violent, a slow, deep rupture, like a certainty cracking without sound. It was no longer theirs, it was no longer hers. And yet, she recognized every note. The melody moved forward as though nothing had changed, but something inside her slipped out of alignment. Her breath stopped like a forgotten thing. The air went in and did not come out properly. Her chest remained suspended, tense inside and uncomfortable in between. The voice continued, too clean and controlled. Where theirs had caught, trembled, and had lived, here everything was corrected. Her fingers tightened more. The joints whitened slightly from the pressure.
No.
The word did not pass through the tablet, nor through her lips, but it was there, clear. This was not it. The song kept going, imperturbable, and as it advanced, something else rose with it. It was not a memory, it was a more unstable, more troubled sensation, as though two versions were overlapping, hers and this one. The lines did not fall in the same places. The breaths were shifted, the silences shortened. They had filled in what, once upon a time, had been left suspended, and that, precisely, was what made her want to turn away. Another voice slipped through, lower, older, almost imperceptible.
That's not you.
Her eyelids closed for a fraction of a second, not long enough to disappear, just long enough to falter.
Do you hear it?
It was not an intrusion, more like something she already knew far too well. Ray opened her eyes again. The music was still playing, but she was no longer inside it. She was facing it now with a colder feeling settled inside her. Not anger, not yet. It was something sharper, an absence, as though, in this version of things, she had never existed at all. And her throat tightened, not to speak, but to contain the pain. Her gaze lingered 1 second too long on the source of the sound. Then, slowly, she looked away. Her fingers left the armrest and reached for the tablet. The movement was steady, steadier than it had been only moments earlier. She wrote, without pausing, without correcting herself.
Let's go back.
She did not lift her eyes immediately. There was no need. Alyssa had already read it.
Very well, my lady.
No questions or hesitation. The chair turned slightly, leaving the music behind them as it continued to play. Ray did not look back. The drive back felt shorter, or perhaps simply quieter. The city continued to exist around her, but she no longer looked at it the same way. The details that, only minutes earlier, had caught her attention slipped away without leaving any imprint on her mind. Her hands rested once more on her knees, calmer but not relaxed. Inside her, something remained taut, not agitation, not panic, rather a tension line, invisible but undeniably there. The vehicle slowed, then stopped. The doors opened. The air of the clinic returned, cleaner, more neutral, more controlled. Ray did not react immediately. Then, without waiting to be asked, she adjusted her posture slightly, as though putting herself back into place. The wheelchair crossed the threshold. The corridors returned, the silence too. Everything was back where it belonged, on the surface, because inside her, nothing truly was anymore. The music was no longer playing, and yet, it was still there.